How many books are you going to read in 2023? In my case, I spent 800 hours reading this year, almost 15% of my waking time, everything, so that I could be here now sharing with you what were the worst and the best books that I read, so that you don't need to read as much, so that you can only cherry pick what makes sense, those that will be 5 stars for you, and you can avoid those that are not really that good. And so what we're gonna see is those 100 books ranked per different categories, and there's gonna be 5. The lowest category, it's gonna be reads that I didn't really enjoy, you won't see me recommending them. Then the second level are gonna be those reads that were just like, well, meh, 2 stars kind of reads. Then we have the third level, which is books that were fine, you know, they were fine reads. It really depends on what you're seeking. They weren't bad, they weren't mesmerizing, they weren't phenomenal, but they were all right. Then we have the next level, which are books that I really loved it, that you will see me passionately sharing with you and that I really believe you can pick. And the last category are those books that were 5 stars that I'm sure that will make it for you as well. So hopefully with this list that blends almost 30 new releases, standalone series, young adult fantasy, fantasy romance, you can find your next 5-star reads. And we're starting strong because I have here City of Stars by Robert Jackson Bennett. Absolutely loved the Founders trilogy, one of my favorites, but this one, it's way more character driven. The premise, it's outstanding, but it's just so slow paced. Then we have The Keeper of Night, which is the first book in this young adult duology. We will have Shinigamis and Reapers, and we will have the story of our girl that will change settings, will move to Japan, different trials that the character will need to pass, and it's very morally grey. But honestly, I just didn't connect with this character. City of Thorns, which is a beginning in a fantasy romance series. It's just so hilarious. It's a good book to read if you want to buddy read it with someone, because there are so many things that are just like eye-rolling. The Book of Night by Holly Black. I'm a huge fan of the Cruel Prince series, and this was her adult fantasy debut. The magic system, it's what makes this book really interesting, which was shadow magic, but sadly that part wasn't really shining so much. It was really forgettable. And ending this worst category, we have What Lies Beyond the Veil, which is also a fantasy romance. In this case, it was supposed to be perfect for lovers of A Court of Thorns and Roses, and you know, it has some elements of the fate, it's chasing this chosen one, but then it's one of the most predictable books that I've read, and I'm not even that good being like super good finding what is gonna happen. We move to the next level, and I'm sorry to say that Stormfront, first book in the Dresden Files series, wasn't for me. It has a little bit the vibe of Supernatural, the TV series, but at least the first book, like the mystery that is to be unraveled, was very predictive. Also, the character was super powerful, and I found it a little bit sexist. I want to continue this series because it has been hyped so much. Sarah J. Maas and I will have some words because Crescent City 2 really was okay-ish meh. Massive world with supposedly very epic things happening, but at the same time there's always a mystery at its core. And although book 1 had this incredible tone, this thriller that was so compelling, book 2, I just felt that the 90% of those pages were like meaningless. One of the biggest bummers of this year was Prison Healer, which is also a fantasy romance. The revolution, there are trials, there's a little bit of soft magic, a slow burn, so the things were there, but the character, Hotel Magnifique was supposed to give me these Caraval vibes and fulfill that void. It had this mesmerizing story where we'll have this hotel that is all magic, and we have also this mystery that needs to be unraveled, but I just felt that the editing of the book, or the prose, what happened, was so confusing. At times I was lost to what happened, couldn't really care for what was happening. A beautiful carcass, but it was empty. The Inheritance games, different mysterious guys that are super powerful, super rich, and you know, they're all different. Our girl likes all of them, and there's this mystery to be unraveled, very similar to Knives Out, but it just felt too similar. A watered down version of Agatha Christie, but so watered down that it was like a little bit almost hilarious. House of Dragons surprised me because it had this concept of different houses that take the misfit and that they will need to fight. And it has a little bit of the Atlas 6 vibe, but at the same time having these different points of view made it really complex to connect with them. One of the books that really made me mad with myself for not liking it, it's Never Die. This had everything for me. One, I really like Quest. Second, I really like Asian inspired stories, and the magic system it's around death and being able to bring people back, and it felt as a video game, but one that it's really repetitive. Then I reread these Hello Vows in order to read the second book, These Twisted Bonds, and although overall I believe the duology it's like in the medium bucket, it's like okay-ish and it's entertaining, but that's it. I really feel that second book wasn't as good, very reminiscent of A Court of Thorns and Roses. It has this love triangle, these different fakers, but second book especially had like 90% of the plot just going on something that was really not that much of a thing, and the last 10% were like this massive conclusion, and everything felt so rushed. And Violet Made of Thorns is the beginning of a young adult series. It has this witch and prince dynamic where our witch will have the power of seeing the future, so it's something that really compels you from page one, also because the banter between the characters it's so entertaining, but I think it could have been way shorter. It doesn't feel as something really important it's happening. Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, it's a standalone by Shay Earnshaw, and it's supposed to be the continuation of the events that happen in Nightmare Before Christmas by Tim Burton, and in here we will have the story of Sally. And although it's in this bucket, I really believe that if you like the movie you can read this book, because it's just a shame that the story of Sally and whatever happened in Halloween Town goes unnoticed for a lot of people, and I have the weirdest feeling because I like what I know now but not necessarily really enjoyed reading it. And concluding this bucket we have Kingdom of the Fiat, which is the last book in the Kingdom of the Wicked series, and overall again I think this trilogy it's a meh, it's like in the middle bucket, but this book felt a little bit weaker. It's the continuation and we ramp up like right after, but there's gonna be a fair amount of explaining to us. We had more pieces of this puzzle that we need to unravel, and the motivation of the characters a little bit off for me. Their personalities change so widely from book one. Moving to the next category, we have We Hunt a Flame, which is one of the first books that I read this year. It has a quest, it has this Arabian setting, which is phenomenal, and dual point of view, enemies to lovers, dangerous creatures that emerge. At the same time, it felt as it brought so many tropes from fantasy that at the end it just seemed like something that I read before, although I didn't. Jade Fire Gold was supposed to be a standalone, but I'm not sure if it's gonna be continuing. What steals the show for me is the magic. We will have one point of view with fire magic, and the other one will have magic that it's very linked to the dead. But I just feel that after reading this at the beginning of the year, now that I look back, it's a book that it's not outstanding. One of the things that broke my heart is Once Upon the Broken Heart, and this one, it just felt as nothing. Now I remember some characters, but I'm not able to tell you the details of the story. Like, it just seemed like so many different things were happening and not really in a cohesive way, if that makes sense. I've heard though that book 2, it's really outstanding, so I will continue with this series. The Zodiac Academy series, I've read from book 1 to book 5. These books are really made for being binged. You cannot stop reading them. As it progressed, I felt that our characters weren't learning enough, and I became so mad with the last books. Fine, bingeable, sexy, but and talking about sexy but meh, we have The War of Two Queens, which is book 4 in the From Blood and Ash series. We will have these different points of view for the first time, which is something that really got me excited. But at the end, I just thought that our characters were not smart, they were not learning, and the things that they were taking, they were like just so hyped, so in love with themselves, it didn't felt realistic in any way or form. We have the Book of Tea duology with a magic steeped in poison, and a venom dark and sweet. Really enjoyed the first book. But the second one, it just felt so different. We have this amazing magic system based on tea. Book 1 I really cherished. It's really cozy duology, very similar to Six Crimson Cranes. Now, a story that I really liked with descriptions that were really compelling in this very rich world. It's The Priory of the Orange Tree. The thing that didn't make it like a great read for me is that somehow I wasn't really able to connect with the characters, and it's the weirdest thing because the descriptions were gorgeous. Trust me, like, it's so enticing. I was seeing it, which is super weird for me, but it wasn't like a great game-changing book that I keep remembering. Rhapsodic, it's the beginning in a fantasy romance, a siren and a demon, and the stakes were great, and I will probably continue with this story. It's just that maybe there was this connection in the past that I wasn't there to see, and that really pisses me off. I want to be there when they are meeting. Kings of the Wild was a fun, short read. We will have all of these Dungeons and Dragons kind of quest vibe. Overall, it's just a story of people that really was famous, were warriors in the past, and now they're just old, which is hilarious. But I just felt again that at times it was repetitive, and I had zero concerns from our characters. His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik was so sweet. Has How to Train Your Dragon vibes off the charts. The Blade itself was a hard read for me because I liked one of the characters. We will see this grim, dark beginning of a fantasy series where we'll have different points of view. It's very character driven and it's very slow paced. Book 1, it has almost no plot. I reckon there's a lot of preparation in this book, and the series will for sure get better. I might give it a try. Fable was all about the vibes. It's fantastic if you like this pirates, you alone at sea kind of vibes, beautiful stars, but the plot again fairly predictable. Middle game was just okay for me. I was very compelled about the magic system, which is mainly around alchemy, and we will have these different characters that are really prodigies. We will have these almost quantum entanglement elements, and it's a book that, being character driven, had this plot that it's advancing, but I just read it and didn't felt as much for the characters as I believe I should. The Starless Sea had so many good elements together that I'm just not sure why this isn't a hit for me. Supposedly the perfect book for book lovers, and you will see different stories intertwined. The main one is going to be a quest finding the truth about this magical mystery world. It was at times a little bit complex to keep track of everything that was happening. This book won the 2022 Goodreads Choice Award for Young Adult Fantasy, and I think it's more middle grade. I think it's a great read if you are looking for something that it's slightly spooky, that it has all of these vibes of a haunted manor, of a tormented main character that has no ability to speak, but she sees ghosts. Also, gorgeous edition. The Legend of Jack Black, it's a young adult standalone. It's a portal fantasy in essence, really reminiscent of Narnia, of Jumanji, and it has all of these different vibes. It's very plot driven, it's very fun, it's very lovely, surprisingly emotional. Rich Kingdom and The Traitor Queen are two books that I really enjoyed from the fantasy romance subgenre this year. Mainly political. Our girl needs to infiltrate. She believes that these other kingdom are their enemies. It has a very mysterious world building because we don't know what hides in this rich kingdom, and we will discover those things little by little by little. The very secret society of irregular witches was so cozy, so fun. For me, it's House in the Cerulean Sea vibes but with witches, and I think it's the perfect book if you're looking for something that it's cozy, that it's easy, and that has this rom-com element at its core as well. We have this misfit trope, this I need to go here, and a character that will train different children, where there's this slow burn at its core. And this was the year of Margaret Rogerson for me, and Vesperdine was probably the worst of them. I really like this sacred relics, death, and also nuns vibe. This religious world that it's about to be unfolded, and this character that it's thrown upon a power that it's way beyond her ability. But the book overall, I think it had some pacing challenges at times, which it didn't made it like higher in this list. The whole prequel of the From Blood and Ash series, so A Shadow in the Amber, In the Light in the Flame, are in here for me. Like, I'm really liking these stories way more than I'm enjoying from Blood and Ash. I think that the world building, it's way more interesting, having these primals of life, of death, these gods. I just think that it's way more epic, that the dynamic between the characters, it's just so well done, and it's the right kind of sexiness, which is so much. And now it's time to move to the next category. And let's start with book 2 and book 3 in the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. This series overall, it's outstanding for me. I just think that the themes are so mind-blowing. We have this amazing magic system where people can inscribe elements and command them to behave in a different way that will start to open your mind to different laws of physics. And there's this mystery always, this very high stakes, charming characters. There's also a sentient object here, which is outstanding. Also concluded this year the Caraval series, reading book 2 Legendary and book 3 Finale, and I just think this series overall, it's one of my favorites. The world building, it's just so mesmerizing, so charming. If I can select a world to leave, I would probably pick Caraval. Then we also have one of the best slow burns that I read. A very pleasant surprise of this year was Only a Monster. In here, what I like the most is the magic system. We'll have these monsters, and they are so because they are able to take time from people, and with that time, with those years, minutes, hours, whatever they take, they are able to time travel. I finalized the Winnowing Flame trilogy with the Poison Song, and overall this series, it's outstanding. Really loved it. It's the perfect blend between fantasy and sci-fi, different points of view, this very big world, and the stakes are so high. There's this world that is about to be unfolded. The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, it's a very charming, cozy story. There's this Asian, very rich environment, a little bit of folklore, and we will also see a slow burn and almost a growing up story. The Shadow of What Was Lost, which it's so chunky, but this for me was a very good start of this trilogy. The magic system, again, it's based on these characters that in the past were able to tell the future, but then started to be unreliable. People killed them, and now those people that had some powers really taken good care of by the society. So we will have these different trials. There's this massive story that it's being built, so there's a lot to unpack in here. The Undertaking of Hard Messy was a very charming standalone. There's this pen pals element that I really loved about it, and it is at its core an enemies to lovers. The Black Prism fascinated me because of the color magic, and we'll have this massive story, but there's also this intrigues. It's fairly political. There's this very frustrating romance, good amount of humor, and I just liked it so much. The Red Rising trilogy. Now, I've read book 1, book 2. I can say this is a series that is hyped because it is really good. The most interesting thing about this series is that the society, it's organized based on different levels, and those levels are reflected as colors, and we will have one of the lowest trying to break the schema of the top side. The Stardust Thief was one of the biggest surprises of this year. It is really reminiscent of We Hunt the Flame in terms of tropes, but at the same time it was done in a way that it just made it for me. This character that has a gene, and because of that she can find artifacts, and there's also this very mysterious quest that you won't forget. Half a Soul, it's a cozy, easy, funny, light-hearted standalone, and it's set in the Regency period, so that's magic in itself, right? It will have the Fae as the evil characters, and at its core a girl that is a misfit. Spiderlight by Adrian Tchaikovsky was so good. It's very similar to Kings of the Wild, but in this case for me the characters were more rich, more reflected, more funny, and the humor just made it for me way more. It's also a quest, good versus evil, but just so short. We also have here a fantasy romance that really surprised me because it has the best love triangle that I've seen in my life, and that is A King So Cold. It's a duology, it's fairly character driven, and we will follow this evil queen. You will devour it. An Enchantment of Ravens was also such a pleasant surprise. It's super cute, it's very plot driven, always has this humor, and the relationship between the characters was honestly very cute. It's gonna be almost a quest, and what wins about this book is that it's just so fluffy, so cozy. It has these fall vibes that are to die for. I also read the whole Mistborn Era 2 series here, so book 1 to 4, and although it's very different from Mistborn Era 1, there's more this flintlock, more modern, industrialized setting. We will have a little bit of a watered down version of the magic, but what wins here is that it's way more adventurous, way more lighthearted, and the characters are just not taking things as seriously as in the first saga. Book 1 starts being really adventurous in almost a standalone, and then everything becomes way more Sanderson. A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik took me by surprise. If you're looking for something really reminiscent of Wednesday, the TV series right now, I think this is the book for you. It's gonna be the school where mainly the focus are the students, there's magic, there's creatures, and there's this almost romance that it's emerging that was also very sweet. Characters were fun, were intriguing, very compelling read. And we go now to the top tier, those books that were phenomenal. So maybe you can take a pen now and start writing down these books because they are outstanding. The City of Brass was fantastic for so many reasons. I consumed this book, I read it almost in one sitting. It has this very beautiful ambience, very different from what I'm used to read. So it was almost a voyage. But beyond that, we have characters that really has a presence. We have a plot that has a stakes that are very high, a mystery that needs to be unraveled. And I've heard that book 2 and 3 are really impressive. Therefore, this is one of the series that I'm 100% continuing next year. Black Sand is the first book in a series, and it's set in this pre-Columbian American civilization, which made this book completely different. It starts with such a bang, it's really savage. The book maintains that same thrilling, that same level almost throughout the whole story. It's really political and religious, but it's done in a way that it's very mesmerizing. This Savage Song by B. Schwab, it's one of the best young adult books that I've read in my life. It's part of a duology, and really it has this very compelling magic, and the premise is fascinating, which is based on the concept that violence breeds monsters, and we will see different types of monsters and these two characters that are really on different sides of this coin, and we will see how the story unfolds, the relationship between them. Really very well written, fascinating story. What else can I say? Kaikeyi was the first book that made me cry this year. This is a new release, and it's a retelling where we will follow Argyle, who is the evil queen. Therefore, it's going to be a very character-driven story. We will follow different stages of our characters' lives, but being very autobiographic, it really still compelled me to keep reading. The things that happened were magical and heartbreaking. Talking about magical, we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This is a very fast and plot-driven book. It has this amazing ambience. It's a nation-inspired story, and it's really filled with different, very vivid and beautiful settings. We will follow Argyle through different stages of her life, which will give us this character growth, but at the same time, the quest that she is undertaking was fantastic, and I really read it very quickly. Book 2 is already here, and I cannot wait. Belladonna has this amazing writing style, this fantastic beginning, and this very compelling story where we will follow our girl that cannot die and her relationship with death. So all of this already separates this story for a lot of things that you've read. It's a little bit of a gothic story, but it has a mystery at its core. It also has this dance. It's beautiful. The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, it's outstanding. I read book 1 and book 2, and although first one was my favorite, I can say that this urban fantasy, that it's mainly a fight between different clans. There's this jade that can grant you powers, you can become a superhuman, and there's this fight for the control of this element. Really made the story political, savage, heartbreaking, and unforgettable. For the Throne, the continuation of the For the Wolf story, was a fantasy romance that really blew my mind away. It is very dark, it has this prophecy, this forest magic, this shadow magic. It was a combination that I thought was fascinating, and although the second book follows another point of view for book 1, I thought it was such on point and it was such an engaging read. It's the kind of read that wanted me to stop my life and just to keep reading and reading and reading. Good old Brandon Sanderson appears again with his shortest novella ever, The Emperor's Soul. It's fascinating because it has different types of magic. It's going to be very character driven. The time that it will take, it's not so long, and we will mainly just see 1-2 characters. It was surprisingly emotional, and really, even being this short, it managed to have this Sunderland ending that we all crave for in his books. Nettle and Bone, it's another very short standalone that it's very compelling because one, the story is pretty dark. It's going to be around this forest. There's going to be a quest. At the same time, it's going to be very lighthearted. There's going to be a lot of humor. The dynamics between the characters are going to be fantastic. And honestly, if you're tired of these classic superhero type of characters, in here, every main character is a misfit, which I loved. And now is the moment to say that I became obsessed with Neil Gaiman. I started reading Stardust a few years back, but this year I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is magic realism, and I really love this story. It's super short, but it's so magical that you will be lost. It's the type of book that you feel things that you're not supposed to, like it scratches something within you that you didn't know you had, and it really looks at how you, being a child, see things way different as us being adults. The Graveyard book I widely adored as well. It starts with such an incredible beginning with this assassination that is happening and this little child that is alone in the world and that will start to live in this graveyard. And what we will see is just so magical, so fantastic. It really reminded me a little bit to Stardust in the themes, the magic that it has. Also, this edition was very beautiful. Circe is another mesmerizing standalone by the same author as The Song of Achilles, and although this is way different, it really conveys kind of like the same feelings we will feel for our main character Circe, and it's going to be a journey throughout different Greek myths. It's really character driven, but at the same time it's just so beautiful, so heartbreaking that you will see how this story will mark you. And we're finally getting to our top 10, although this list was already so complicated to make. And we have here Legends and Ladders. This is a book with really lower stakes but just a very cozy environment, and I always go back in my mind to that feeling. It talks mainly about this character that has the dream to open a coffee shop, and what we will see is just the chasing of a dream, but in a really cozy, comfy, almost normal kind of vibe, which was so refreshing and honestly a happy book. Sorcery Made of Thorns, it's another book that it's all about the ambience. We will have this library full of books that can change this almost gothic touch to it, but the relationship that the different characters will have, it's going to be outstanding. Really, the humor in here was really on point for me. I just loved every one of the characters. I really thought it was very compelling how for the sorcerers to exist here, they need to bond with demons, and these demons lend them their powers. I fell in love with Piranesi, which is a masterpiece. It's a very short standalone, very character driven, but I was surprised to how naive and beautiful the main character was. He is approaching this life that it's full of uncertainty in this almost scientific way, and although I thought this book was going to be not for me, I really enjoyed it. The mystery was really compelling, and our main character, it's just so precious. This year I concluded the Aurelian Cycle by rereading book 2 and finally the release book 3. This is a trilogy that, although it's young adult, will really compel you even if you're an older reader, if you like adult fantasy. It's very political and it has dragons. The arc of the characters, it's very well crafted, and it's not an easy book. It's not something that you will necessarily enjoy, although you will love. Bloodmark, it's the continuation in the Legendborn series, and really this book was out of this world. This series, it's consolidating as one of my favorite young adult series of all time. It has this Arthurian mythology, but it's just not bad. The character will suffer so much. There's a lot of trigger warnings, but it's a book that is going to be really deep, that is going to be really moving, inspiring, emotional, and there's also, of course, this angst, a little bit of a love triangle. It really has a lot of elements that you can read and enjoy. Babel by R.F. Kuang, it's a Dark Academia standalone, the one that maybe has been talked about the most this year, and it's for a reason. I thought, again, this book wasn't gonna be for me, and it certainly took me a little bit to get into it, almost 100 pages, but once that you get into the story, you will almost feel as one of the characters. There's this revolution at its core, this magic, there's this fighting, this intense feelings that only R.F. Kuang can convey in a book. One of my favorite adult fantasy series got the second book out this year, which was The Bone Shard Emperor, the continuation of Bone Shard Daughter, and next year we will have the conclusion. This story, it's the perfect blend between fantasy and horror. It has a fascinating magic system where we will have this emperor that is able to inscribe bones, create constructs, and rule those constructs. And we will see a deeply political, mysterious story. We'll also have some tropes from the sci-fi world. There's going to be a mythical creature, and overall, the blend of these different characters, it's outstanding. Promise of Blood, the beginning of the Powder Mages trilogy, blew me away. Having 3 different points of view in this flintlock subgenre of fantasy was outstanding. The beginning starts really strong with a coup that has just happened, and we will see different lines. One that's going to be very political, another one that's going to be detective-esque, and the last one is going to be very war-driven. The humor, it's outstanding. The relationship between the characters, it's not easy, and I enjoyed also the hard magic system that we will see, these different layers. I thought it was perfect book. But the perfect book of this year was no doubt Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a standalone as well, and this honestly feels as reading Pride and Prejudice. But if our main character, Emily Marchwick, was fighting in a war, what we will see here is this arc that it's outstanding, this very intense relationship, this slow burn, this angst, this relationship that is almost as pen pals, that it's very funny, very different, and we'll also have a war unraveling and its consequences, which made it a very good rounded book for me, and really cannot recommend enough. Thank you for getting up till this point. Say something in the comments below so that I know that you're here, and to keep pushing people to see it. If you like this video, please share it with your friends so that they can also extract good books for their list next year. But what I am most excited about is to also see your thoughts on these books, because reading, it's so subjective. So let me know what were your favorites, or if you read any of these. I am dying to chat afterwards in the comments, so really see you there.